Welcome everybody to today's session. My name is Anna and I thought we would start with a few minutes of breathing meditation to settle our mind from the day's activities. So for anybody who hasn't done meditation, and that's not so many people who come to these kind of courses anymore, but the central part of a good meditation is to have a nice straight back, and for the rest of the body to be not too relaxed, but nice and relaxed. So we have a nice straight back, whether we're sitting on a chair or we're sitting cross-legged on the floor. Then we can raise our shoulders and drop them down to have a nice relaxed position. Put our head slightly forward. If it's up like this, we'll get agitated. If it's down like here, we'll get sleepy. Have our right hand sitting in our left hand with our thumbs together, and then just resting our hands in the lap. And ideally we have our elbows a little bit away from the torso, which prevents us becoming sleepy. So we rest our tongue on the roof of the mouth, the tip just behind the teeth, which helps prevent the build-up of saliva. And then we just withdraw our attention from all of other activities and from our surrounds and from any sounds that we might hear, and we just focus our attention for a short while on the breath. And we can do that either on our diaphragm, on the rising and falling of the diaphragm, or we can do it as the breath moves up and down the nostrils, whichever you feel the most comfortable, or some people even like it in the higher chest. So we'll spend a few minutes doing that, and I'll do a little bit of guiding as well. So for those who haven't done a lot of breathing meditation, this is a learned skill, and sometimes the first thing that happens is that we find our mind is very busy. So we don't need to worry about that. When we find that we're thinking about something, or we're observing a sound or a sensation on our body, or something else that's going on, we just practice withdrawing from that and returning our focus to the breath. Just watch the movement of the breath as it goes in and out. And think this is a precious time when I don't have to be doing a million other things or thinking about a million other things. This is a precious time for myself to develop a sense of peace, sense of calm, some spaciousness, and all of those other things can just wait for this very short period of time. Any thoughts or feelings or sensations do pop in, We just let them go very gently, like we might observe the passing clouds in the sky. Let them go and return our attention very gently to the breath. The goal of this exercise is a mind that's still as a very still lake, without even the slightest breath of wind impacting the surface of the water. In and out, or rising and falling. And when you're ready, release your concentration. So this introductory course is primarily aimed at finding ways to care for ourselves and care for others. And it will draw on the remarkable text, Meditations on the Path to Enlightenment, by the Tibetan Buddhist Society's inspiring founder and spiritual guide, Venerable Geshe Acharya Thubten Loden. So each session will include a talk and guided meditation or meditations and an opportunity for questions. So Geshe Loden is from the same extraordinary lineage of teachings as His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Geshe Loden is the gentleman just behind me, and other famous Tibetan Buddhist teachers. So he lived in Australia from 1976 until his passing at 88 in 2011, and he taught many thousands of students here in Australia, and before then in India and Tibet, and he was much beloved by his students. I was fortunate to be one of the students, and a few years before he passed away, I took ordination as a Buddhist nun. So I'm trying as best as I can to repay his decades of unfailing kindness and patience, and I continue to volunteer with many others here at this beautiful meditation centre here in Europe, which includes this magnificent traditional Tibetan temple where I'm sitting right now. So let's focus on today's topic of impermanence. and how understanding the role of change in our lives can be very transformative. So we've got many reference points within our pandemic, and many people coped very well with the pandemic era, eating nutritious and enjoyable foods, doing lots more wonderful home cooking, doing their exercises, staying connected, and being constructive with their time. Others found the experience overwhelming and depressing, with the 24/7 news cycle and analyses, and so many events happening in their lives, some of them very challenging, like loss of job, difficulties with their health, family or friends unwell, fear and anxiety about COVID itself, isolation. And of course, and I expect this is most people, it was a mixture of the two. Some people, they had a bit of both, some calm periods and others of disturbance, so a good mix of experiences. And really everybody has their own unique story of the pandemic. So what can we do to bring our pandemic situation into perspective, to create a space for more happiness, to reduce any difficult moments, underlying anxiety and stresses, emotional responses to situations like this and to any challenges? So we teach that the more we can help ourselves to become more peaceful and calm, it's going to be a win-win for everyone. It's going to benefit ourselves and it's going to benefit others. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that caring for others requires caring for oneself. So really caring for others is in our nature, a core human aspect, and with a mind of affectionate, caring love, the heartfelt wish for others' happiness, we can bring benefit no matter how distant we are. So in return, acting selflessly will in fact support our own well-being. But when we care for others, we also need to gently care for ourselves. With good food is obviously really important, beneficial activities, having patience, having rest and exercise, and a happy mind. So the great Mahayana Buddhist concepts of great love and great compassion and bodhichitta, which we'll talk about in future sessions, amply demonstrate this kind of thinking. So exploring the truth of love for ourselves, our own well-being, and each other is an essential part of Buddhist philosophy and teachings, and these are known as the Dharma. So in this course, we will explore 4 areas to assist our journey to care more for ourselves and for others. And today's topic is the great meaning of change, as I mentioned before. Next week, we'll look at the joy of love and compassion, then pathways to caring for self and others. There's lots and lots of different ways and tools, and Buddhist ideas on cherishing, and so things like meditations, how to establish a regular practice, investigating the great lives of teachers who've given us so many good examples of ways to follow, and approaches such as never give up. Even if we're finding things are challenging, then having a good strong approach of having the sort of underlying core commitment to never give up, never mind how hard it might get at times, which for most of us it does at times. So each one of these teachings is also a core teaching of a man first known as Prince Siddhartha and later named Shakyamuni Buddha, the awakened one. So Shakyamuni Buddha studied the mind in great depth, and his teachings show us the potential, the great potential of each and every human being for great peace, for love, for happiness and kindness. And following long periods of contemplation, he discovered that all of us, that every single human has the opportunity to become more highly evolved by developing our mind and by ripening our own what he called Buddha potential. So after he made this and other remarkable discoveries about the nature of the mind, Shakyamuni Buddha was requested by others to teach. And now, 2,600 years later, the recognition of the value of these teachings is so expansive and meaningful. The teaching is still happening and recognised even more widely than ever across the world in this 21st century. So these extraordinary teachings have been passed in what's known as a lineage system, and that's passing from teacher to student, teacher to student. It's known as a very pure lineage system, teacher to student for almost 2,600 years. That is quite remarkable. So two of the recent great teachers in this era, who then themselves, great students, who then themselves have become teachers, are His Holiness and our own spiritual guide, Geshe Loden. It has been their goal to make these profound teachings accessible to those who are interested in Buddhist philosophy in countries beyond Tibet and Asia, and especially in the West. In times to come, their role, towards the end of my life and beyond, their role and the role of some of the other High Lamas and teachers, Buddhist teachers who've come into Western countries, will be widely recognised as truly momentous and historic. So going back to the core topic for today, impermanence, why understanding change is so valuable. So today we will explore the great value of learning about the real meaning of change. And when we really understand this deeper meaning, events that unfold simply don't faze us much. That's probably the most important of the benefits. There are a number of benefits, and I'll go through those later, but that's probably the core one, is that the ups and downs of life that we're inevitably going to experience, with various things happening both to us individually and as a group, will not rock us so much, because we'll understand that that is a natural part of life. We'll learn that change is a normal part of life, and they describe it in the Buddhist philosophy: whatever meets, then later parts. Whatever is born will naturally later pass. Whatever joins together will then disperse. This change is a profound part of life, including the mind. And although our approach to the world can feel very stuck at times, especially when there are challenges, the marvellous news is that our mind can also change. We can change our mind and how we approach things, and therefore become much more peaceful and happier most of the time. We can already clearly see with the pandemic, it's a very good example, that as tragic as it has been and challenging as it has been, it won't last. It hasn't lasted. But the sense of the pandemic passing certainly didn't feel like that as Delta struck and Melbourne entered its 4th and 5th and 6th lockdowns. We could have been forgiven for feeling quite wedged at times, and many people did, unless they consciously determined to lift their spirits. That is, they changed their mindset. It was the quality of their mind, not the circumstances, that made the difference. And this is a core aspect of Buddhist teaching, is that we have this possibility to change the way that we approach the world, and that the experiences may not change, but how we deal with them will change. So cultivating a more balanced and rational response to change is an uncomplicated way to create more peace and happiness for ourselves and our relationships with those people around us. We can tap into our natural ability to function well, even in the most difficult circumstances, if we train our mind and we develop new habit patterns, because we develop patterns of actually responding to situations. And it's those patterns that meditation and some of the other tools of Buddhism will help us to deal with, managing how we can actually cut through those patterns. So if we continuously hold on to what we think is stable and solid and permanent, we're actually living a falsehood. Because there is only one certainty, that everything will change. The COVID period has been a perfect example, very easy for us to see, very clear. So trying to hold on to what seems secure and solid, that all of us experience at some level, some of it can be quite subtle, can lead us to be much more fearful and frightened and less able to function, and sometimes not even function at all. So when we let that go, we begin to gain more flexibility to go with the flow, using modern jargon. This is the point. We can change the mind. We can say to ourselves, this thinking pattern or that thinking pattern is not that helpful. It is contributing to a kind of depression or depressed state or some other kind of negative state of mind. What can I do about it? I can give a really, really small example that happened to me in the last few days. I've been watching a series on SBS, which was clever and focused on the age-old battle between good and evil. But I started to feel quite miserable, and I realised that some scenes were just a little bit too dark for my comfort levels and possibly affecting me. So I stopped watching it, and my mind just naturally lifted and went for a walk instead into the garden and looked at the flowers and felt a whole lot better about the world. So each of us can think about what we were doing this time a couple of years ago and the year before that. And there is possibly some kind of pattern, but this pandemic has broken all of that, and we've lived so differently it was impossible to imagine. Naturally, we all wanted it to improve as quickly as possible, but who knew what was coming next? Or without creating a sense of uncertainty and fear, whoever really knows what's coming next? So that was the point, that we could not possibly have imagined that we were going to be living through a pandemic. If you'd asked me that in childhood, no, not something that was on my radar. So that's actually the way the world really is all of the time. We have no idea when good fortune might arise and might shine, or when illness or death or some other misfortune might come along as well. So how, in that context then, how good is the wisdom of Shakyamuni Buddha, who was working this all out 2,600 years ago. So he was initially living in the most amazing circumstances, a bit like many of us have been living, because we, certainly my generation, we didn't experience the wars or the depression. Apart from things that, terrible things that happen overseas and the bushfires and things like that, we haven't really lived in something globally challenging, such as, war or depression, and now we have with this pandemic. So it was, so that is, he also had really amazing circumstances. So it was a very natural life. So long ago, and of course 2,600 years ago, there was no electricity and none of the benefits of modern technologies that we enjoy today. But he was also a prince and very well looked after and had all the luxuries of ancient India, very handsome, wonderful at sports, very good at his studies and all his endeavours, and many beautiful friends, and eventually a very beautiful wife. But then one day, and he really had nothing, absolutely nothing. He was so well catered for and cared for that he really had nothing in his life to worry about at all. But then one day at the edges of his family's palace, he happened to observe activities that he hadn't really seen before. He came across people who were experiencing various forms of suffering. And those people were a person who had died, somebody who was very, very ill, and somebody in old age. And he was really, really concerned about this experience, and it really affected his mind, and he wanted to think about it very deeply, and he wanted to understand what this suffering was all about. And it also really bothered him very deeply that why can't all these people be in the same situation as me? Why are they going through all of this? I'm so happy and with no problems, but they're going through these what looked like terrible experiences. So he was so moved by all of this, and it was so profound an experience for him that he decided, made up his mind that he wanted to give up his worldly life and to go and have a much deeper understanding of the difference between suffering and happiness, and to see if he could fathom out a way that other people could have a more peaceful and subdued and better experience of life. So he decided that he'd also had observed an ascetic, and he decided that he would go and live the life of an ascetic in the forest and meditate and try to uncover some answers to these very, very puzzling questions. So one of the most important discoveries, he made a large number of discoveries that he's since then taught, but one of the most important in his 6 years of meditation on suffering was that everything produced is impermanent. He thought all beings and all products disintegrate. He asked himself why and came to the view because people and products are the result of causes, conditions, and the collecting together of parts, which do not have the power, have no power or ability to sustain themselves permanently. So Geshe Loden, who was a great scholar and meditator, having first become a monk when he was just 7 years old and have studied for more than 50 years. So he was a great scholar in the great temples of both Tibet and subsequently in India, after many Tibetan monks moved to India and Tibetan people moved to India in 1959. So he then continued his studies, but he explains it really beautifully in his Path to Enlightenment books, what this means and examples of why it's so relevant. So a product is produced from the variety of parts, causal actions and conditions, and we give all of those products labels. So, for example, in the West, we have decided to label the places that we live in, we call them houses. Doesn't need to be inherently called as a house, but that's what we have called it as the label. Therefore, a product or a house has a label house, it has all the parts of a house, it has all the causal actions that brought that house together, and it has circumstances and conditions that allowed it to become a house. And we also have our minds, which have decided that it's a house as well. So that's the viewing consciousness. So let's unpack all of that, and as we do, we'll come to a better understanding of why impermanence is a useful contemplation. So let's consider a house. For example, there is a concrete slab, there's the struts of a house, there's the walls of a house, the roof, the windows and doors, and it needs a lot of decisions, finding a builder, a plumber, a glazier, and an electrician, and all sorts of manufacturers, tradespeople and ancillary service to put this house together. So this house endures for a period of time, maybe 50 years. If it's better constructed, like a castle or a big brick building, it might be much longer, 100 to 200 years, but it's never going to be permanent. If we think about it more, nothing in that house is permanent. It is not a permanent. It looks solid. It looks very solid. But if we return in 100 or 200 years, the house and most of its contents will have gone, eventually disintegrated into rubble, most likely, or repurposed. So every other object is exactly the same. Any gathering is impermanent and will eventually disperse. We collect food, clothing, and various possessions, but none of them remain with us permanently. They too have labels, parts, causes, and conditions. So plants might grow for days or years, but they'll eventually decay and disappear. Or hundreds of years even, like a Californian redwood, which will live for a very long time. Even mountains and valleys that we think look so solid, the continents and oceans, the suns and moons of planets, and even universes come into existence. They change constantly and eventually are no more. Even if we observe our body, we can vividly see impermanence. We remember when we're very young and strong, athletic, or maybe we still are, athletic and full of energy, or very young and love to go on the swings and roundabouts and sit on our parents' laps. Then we grew into teens, through the 20s with so many changes and different experiences. And now we can look at the mirror for a clear example of impermanence. We observe the changes in our expression. Sometimes you look long enough, we can even see tiny changes in impermanence before our very eyes as we look in the mirror. Apparently, for example, we change our skin once every 7 years. We're removing 30 to 40,000 skin cells every day. So it is quite conceivable that we can observe tiny changes in colour, in shape and appearance that occur moment by moment. So thinking about our biology will give us many more examples of changes in the body that are in fact happening all of the time. We can easily observe the changes by observing our energies. How we could keep going day and night in our teens and 20s, and step by step this capacity disappears. How our energies fluctuate during the day and week. Tired 1 minute, exhausted 1 minute, and ready to run the next, feeling as though we have got boundless energy and we're ready to do thousands of jobs and fun activities. So we can also observe impermanence by observing tiny changes in our mind. Our moods can change. We can be elated one day and quite sad the next, calm in the morning and agitated by the afternoon if something's happened, full of altruism and kindness one moment and then obsessed with self-concern the next. Our mind is constantly changing because as a product it is impermanent. In fact, mindfulness of the breath is a really good way for us to observe impermanence. If the breath were permanent, then its nature would be that it wouldn't change. It would not rise or fall. It wouldn't come in and out or move or change in any way. So in observing the breath, we can reflect on these momentary changes and recognise its impermanence. There was a wonderful, courageous Buddhist teacher. His name was Acharya, and he was known to sit by the river recollecting impermanence. He thought it was a very, very important topic for the development of the mind, and he would sit and watch the flow of the water and currents, which are always moving and changing. The same with the ocean, the tides and waves breaking on rocks. Acharya himself knew water like nobody else, having travelled in a rickety boat from India to Indonesia in the 14th century looking for a very special teaching. That's another story for another time, but a testimony to the strength of Acharya's mind. He had a very, very strong and well-developed mind. So also this group, we gather together, albeit online for this class. We're in all different places, collecting together for this short time, and then refocusing on life and our different directions at the end of the session. Then we can think about some of the famous people that we know of who seem like fairly regular parts of our sphere of life. So the people that we're familiar with in the daily news at the moment, that would include President Biden and perhaps Jacinda Ardern, Scott Morrison, Boris Johnson, famous celebrities like Lady Gaga and young, handsome Prince George. Every single one of them within the next 150 years will have passed and become part of history. So the essence of life, in other words, is impermanence. So the way that the Buddha expressed it more than 2,500 years ago, he said, collection ends in dispersal, rising ends in falling, meeting ends in parting, and birth ends in death. So why is impermanence so important to remember? So these are the few of the reasons why it is very, very useful for us to remember impermanence. Because when challenges happen, we can remember that the pain and suffering from those challenges won't last. If they do, it will eventually soften and lessen. Just like our lockdown and our pandemic. They softened and they've lessened. We don't get so excited. Secondly, we don't get so excited or overexcited about the highs in our life, because they won't last either. We try to remember by remembering impermanence, we stay more even. Not to say that we don't enjoy the highs in our life. There's nothing wrong with enjoyment. There's also nothing wrong in being sad, but it's getting caught up in those emotions and overreacting in some way, whether it's in a negative way or overexcitement, that causes issues. So understanding impermanence will help us to find a very peaceful place, like the deeper parts of the ocean. So there might be a storm on the surface of the ocean, all sorts of things happen, but the deeper part of the ocean remains strong, it remains stable, yet permeable, flexible, and most importantly, able to move and act in a way that's appropriate for that moment. So if we stay peaceful and calm and don't get caught up in the excitement and don't get caught up in the sadness that we may be experiencing, then we'll be able to be of most benefit to ourselves and to others at that point in time. It's also the beginning, if we have a good understanding of impermanence, one of the very, very important concepts within Buddhist practice is called emptiness. And emptiness of inherent existence is a really profound teaching, and impermanence is the start. Having a good understanding of impermanence is a really, really good starting point. We touched on a little bit of the issues about our interconnectedness and everything being related to everything else, but we'll touch on this before the end of the course further. So seeing our interdependence and the true view of the nature of reality is really the essential way to remove our negative habits and negative patterns of behaving, and we can talk about that later. So this is where, at this point, so that's a really, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 really good reasons why it's really useful to remember impermanence. So this is where our meditation and our mindfulness and our mind training come in. So they're helping us to reveal our own natural, as the Buddha described, everyone has this natural potential for stability and for peace and for happiness and for joy. And meditating regularly on impermanence is a really important part of that journey. The fact that meditation can create significant neural changes is now well known within the scientific community. So Sarah Lazar, she's a neuroscientist at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School, was one of the first scientists to take the anecdotal claims about the benefits of meditation and mindfulness and test them in brain scans, and she was really surprised by the results. She says that in fact, the meditation can actually, change the brain and make it areas for improvement. So she said that we found differences in brain volume after 8 weeks in 5 different regions in the brain of 2 groups. In the group that learned meditation, we found thickening and 4 regions improving. The primary difference we found in the posterior, they call it the posterior cingulate, which is involved in mind wandering and self-relevance. The left hippocampus, which assists in learning, cognition, memory and emotional regulation. The temporoparietal junction, or TPJ as it's known in the sector, is associated with perspective taking, empathy and compassion. There's also an area of the brain apparently called the pons, where a lot of regulatory neurotransmitters are produced. And then the amygdala, the fight or flight part of the brain, which is important for anxiety, fear and stress in general, that got smaller apparently in the group that went through mindfulness-based stress reduction programs. So there is another very well-known researcher. Her name's Emma Seppala, and she's a psychologist at Stanford and a director of a group organisation called Compassion Care. She says that research has shown that meditation and mindfulness can, in fact, strengthen the immune system and potentially even lengthen our lives as a result of that. So we're going to now do a special meditation on impermanence, and meditating regularly on impermanence and setting up a regular meditation practice with different topics, but having a good, strong understanding of impermanence can quickly bring about change in our minds, reducing our anxiety and fixations, recognising everything is bound to change. There are going to be, right throughout our lives, there's going to be endless numbers of circumstances that we experience as a group, as we did with the pandemic, and that we experience individually, as we do in the ups and downs of our lives, new jobs or changes in our families, obviously, passing of our parents, the arrival of children. So many different things happen all the time that can create joys and stresses. So it is enjoyable, it is great, but don't get too excited, as it won't last. If it is terrible, don't get caught up in the negative emotions, it won't last. Keep going, never give up, keep our focus on this calm and stability and opportunities to support and care for others as well as ourselves. So by meditating, it is said in Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, is by meditating on our impermanence, our mind becomes a giant ocean liner on the waves of a deep ocean. If it's calm, the ship stays steady. If the weather is rough, the giant ocean liner also stays steady. We develop the capacity to remain calm and peaceful, in serenity, able to help ourselves and others, whatever is going on externally. Okay, so let's return to our good posture with a nice straight back and relaxed shoulders, our head slightly forward, our right hand and our left hand, the tips of the thumbs together, relaxed in the lap, elbows slightly away from the torso, the tongue on the roof of the mouth behind the teeth, the head slightly forward. Our eyes can either be fully closed just gently or just slightly open if we're able to do that. So we just choose which place that we would like to observe our breath, either up and down our nostrils, or the rising and falling of the diaphragm, or even the upper chest. And we return to settling our mind, withdrawing from all of the day's activities, what we might be doing tomorrow, what the plan is for the week ahead, who's giving us a hard time at the moment. All of those topics, just gently let them go for the moment. So we can even bring some attention now to reflecting on momentary changes of our breath and recognise the impermanence of our breath. The breath that we just had will not come again. and slightly different from the breath before. Completely impermanent. As the breath moves in and out or up and down, just gently observe the subtle changes. If you have any sensations or sounds, just let them go. And return our focus to observing the subtle changes of the breath. It moves up and down the nostril, or the rising and falling of our chest. One deep, one shallow. Moving in, moving out. And we can move our attention to thinking about our body. Remember as children how we might have loved to go on the swings or play footy in the backyard and sit on our parents' laps while we watch television. Or with grandma. Then as we grow in our teens, it was a whole different experience. During the curiosity of spreading our wings and the vitality of our youth. Exploring boundaries, doing sports, reading, so many activities. Now most of us are older and we have completely different moments of happiness and joy. Some it might be exercising, some might love cooking great feasts, others wandering through gardens, running and so forth. So many changes in such a short period of time. Then we can remember each day that we're removing thousands of skin cells. Maybe our hair has changed colour. We even notice the tiny changes in colour, shape and appearance that occur moment by moment, day by day. We can also observe impermanence by observing the tiny changes in the mind. Our moods change throughout the day. Relaxed, maybe elated one moment and depressed the next, perhaps depending on the news. You might be calm in the morning and agitated by the afternoon, full of love and kindness sometimes, and obsessed with our own needs and others. Our mind constantly changes because as a product it is impermanent. We can think about a river. We can imagine a beautiful river. And we can recollect impermanence like Atisha did. We think about the flow of the water and the currents, always moving and changing. Time as a river meanders placidly, gently, smooth. At other times it's a busy torrent, rushing and falling over rocks. Maybe dropping like a waterfall. Sometimes our magnificent river is broad. Sometimes it is narrow, carving its way through some rocks. Sometimes our river is very shallow, and sometimes it is very deep. Sometimes our river is straight as an arrow. Simple and uncomplicated. And other times our river is twisting and winding and hard to follow. We can use this river as an analogy for our minds. This one stream of consciousness is never the same in the present instant as it was in the instant before. Like the river, our mind is sometimes open, sometimes closed, sometimes deep, and sometimes narrow. Sometimes straight as an arrow, and sometimes winding and confused. Then for a short time, we concentrate on the impermanence of the mind. Our mind wanders. Again, we bring it back to the topic, thinking about the impermanence of the mind, the changes that happen day by day and hour by hour, like the changes of the river. In this way, we're developing our understanding of impermanence and increasing our concentration. So therefore, the essence of life is impermanence. As the Buddha said so clearly, collection ends in dispersal, rising ends in falling, meeting ends in parting, birth ends in death. So in summary, we have two important conclusions. Now we might be experiencing a difficult time, we might be experiencing a neutral time, we might be experiencing a very happy time. None of these will continue indefinitely. Our best way to manage the highs and lows is to aim to remain steady and calm as possible. Our mind or mental state is in fact the boss, not the external experience. So that's the conclusion of today's session, and next week we will look at the importance and joy of love and compassion. Just finish off with a small dedication. So in recognition of the effort of this meditation and this class, we can dedicate the positive energy that we have created towards more happiness in our lives, more good conditions, better health, and also happiness and good conditions for the people that we love, and if we like, for all living beings. So, as mentioned, next week we'll look at the value of great love and compassion. And if you have time during the week, I recommend to do some meditation on impermanence. If you would like to have that guided, then you can listen to the meditation part of the session again, or any part of it that you would like. It's on YouTube, and you're welcome to do your meditation with being guided through it on impermanence. So it's a very, very beneficial meditation to do if you're inclined to do that. So has anybody got any questions before we move on? And I'm going to first of all thank Manakam, who so kindly helps with all of our online classes, and also ask if he can see if there are any questions that you might put into the chat. If you would prefer to ask a question later, you're also welcome to send through any questions marked Anna to our email address events@toshita.org, and I'm also happy to answer them next week instead if you would like that. Sometimes, you finish a session and you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, and we don't have the luxury at present of having a more casual request and conversation over a cup of tea. Hopefully that will return in the not too distant future. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a great week ahead, and if you'd like to join us again, we'll see you next Sunday at 1:30. Bye now.